Welcome to the Blue Poppy video series. Today we're going to be talking about quality discernment of white ginseng. And so in this particular video we're just going to be talking about the quality discernment of common field-grown white ginseng. So in general we differentiate field-grown ginseng from forest-grown ginseng. Forest-grown ginseng, it's often sold as wild ginseng, but less than 2% of the product on the market is estimated to actually be wild. Almost all of the product that's sold as wild ginseng is actually half wild ginseng. Ginseng that's either raised in the forest by transplanting the juvenile roots and growing them in the forest, or ginseng that's grown by humans scattering seeds in the forest. True wild ginseng is very rare, always comes with authentication documents, lot numbers, digital tracking systems, and relatively sophisticated aspects of quality control that are going to be beyond the scope of this one little YouTube video, but we'll be doing other videos on forest ginseng. In future videos we'll talk about differentiating true wild ginseng from half wild ginseng, the transplanted ginseng that's grown in the forest by transplanting, ginseng that's grown in the forest by scattering the seeds. Today we're just going to be talking about common cultivated ginseng. If we look at a root of forest-grown ginseng compared to a typical root of field-grown ginseng, you can see there's a pretty dramatic difference. In nature, it takes ginseng 12 to 20 years to get even a tiny little size like a 2-gram average root. It grows very slowly in the natural environment, whereas in the field-grown ginseng you can get it to about this size after about 4 years. And so the dose of 10 grams of ginseng in ancient times, if you're dealing with 2-gram root, that's about 20 years old, and you were giving 10 grams in ancient times, back then you would be giving essentially the equivalent of 100 years of plant growth. The little ginseng root consolidating its chi into this tiny little area, growing in a very harsh mountainous environment through very difficult winters, storing all its chi in a very tiny little area. And you have about 100 years of total plant growth to get a single 10-gram dose in ancient times. Nowadays, you can have one ginseng root that would be 30 grams, 40 grams, 50 grams, and growing in only 4 to 6 years. So the 10-gram dose of ginseng now is just a tiny little piece out of a single 4-year-old ginseng root. So in terms of the ancient ginseng versus the modern ginseng, certainly there is a difference, but the price of mountain-grown ginseng makes it prohibitive to use for a common prescription. So generally speaking, nowadays what we use is the normal field-grown ginseng. They started cultivating ginseng as early as the Ming Dynasty. It's been in cultivation for more or less about 500 years or so. Ginseng is relatively difficult to grow in the field, and there have been a number of innovations as far as getting ginseng to be grown organically, getting ginseng to be grown with GAP, Good Agricultural Practice standards, and now they're moving more towards the GAP standard. China doesn't have a mandatory GAP requirement for ginseng, but there's discussion that they're going to start implementing it. Korea and Japan both grow ginseng. Korean ginseng is mostly processed into red ginseng, but they also have white ginseng. And they also have ginseng that's parboiled, which looks a little bit yellowish on the outside and reddish on the inside. In Japan, they primarily use parboiling. The product that's made in Japan is generally called Dongyangshen. Dongyangshen Eastern Seas ginseng has a slightly different appearance to white ginseng because it's been parboiled. On the outside it looks a little bit yellowish white, on the inside it looks red. So today we're going to be talking just about white ginseng specifically, and then we'll be talking a little bit more in subsequent videos on the differentiation of red ginseng and differences between, for example, American ginseng, Xiangshen, versus Japanese ginseng, Dongyangshen, talking about the differences between Korean ginseng and Chinese ginseng in terms of the processing and the Chinese medicine actions of them. So as far as basic quality discernment, these roots here are fairly typical of what we call Shengshaishen. Shengshaishen is just simply means sun-dried ginseng, and usually Shengshaishen, the sun-dried ginseng roots, are sold with the whiskers intact, the tails intact. When we use ginseng for prescriptions, oftentimes we break off these tails because it makes it easier to slice the ginseng. So these tails are generally only sold in relatively nice specimens of roots that are used to, oftentimes people will soak them to make a medicinal alcohol. You can see the dramatic difference in size between the field-grown ginseng soaked in alcohol here from the mountain-grown ginseng. This is grown by transplanting the ginseng into the forest, and then this is mountain-grown ginseng that's grown by scattering the seeds in the forest. So this would be the top grade, the second grade, and then this would be a more average grade. And so generally speaking, when you're paying attention to ginseng, the main features you want to look at are the neck development, and then they're very dense striations, little thin lines, and the density and the smoothness and evenness of those striations is associated with quality. If the ginseng is sliced and you look at a cross-section of the ginseng, you can also see a little bit of a ring development at the center of the root. And the more clear and prominent those rings are, generally speaking, the better the quality. With ginseng, the most important aspect is flavor and taste. So having experienced trying different ginsengs and really experiencing the taste and the flavor of them is one of the most important aspects of their quality discernment. So there's no real substitute visually for the experience of actually knowing the flavor. But visually, generally you're looking for large, full roots that don't have a lot of imperfections, hollow cores, rotting spots. You want it to be relatively dense, relatively firm, relatively heavy. And you want an intact, nicely developed neck. Generally speaking, as the neck gets larger and fuller, the ginseng root is older. Each year the ginseng grows out of the rhizome here, this neck, and it leaves a scar behind it after each year of growth. So you can use the scars to count the basic age of the ginseng. Most white ginseng is picked after about 4 years. Sometimes it stays in the ground as long as 5 years or 6 years. Red ginseng, typically the good quality red ginseng, will stay in the ground for 5 or 6 years. So red ginseng is often a little bit older. White ginseng tends to be a little bit higher in its ginsenoside profile than red ginseng, but the individual ginsenosides change in their ratio when the ginseng is steamed to make red ginseng. So one of the key active constituents of red ginseng, called RG3, is formed during the steaming process. So in terms of traditional medicine and modern science, red ginseng and white ginseng have some differences in terms of their traditional therapeutic action and their modern pharmacology. So this is relatively typical of the Chinese commercial root. These roots are also grown in China, but they've had the tails trimmed off. These particular roots were both grown together at the same organic farm, but from 2 different types of seed. This is a 4-year-old ginseng from Jilin seed, from Chinese domestic seed. This one is grown at the same farm, an organic farm in Jilin province, but this particular one is grown from Korean seed. And it's difficult to tell with just a couple isolated specimens, but when you see the whole batches, the whole batch of Jilin seed versus the whole batch of Korean seed, the Korean seed tends to produce a ginseng that's a little rounder, a little fatter, and also some differences in the neck formation. This is white ginseng that's grown in Korea. Most Korean ginseng is processed into a red form and is sold at a relatively high price. Korean white ginseng is less common on the market, but it's also less expensive. It's more expensive than Chinese ginseng, but it has generally very good quality control. And it can be difficult to find authentic Korean white ginseng outside of East Asia. In fact, even within China, it can be difficult to find authentic Korean-grown white ginseng. One of the better places to buy it is in Korea or in a place like Taiwan. So when you're assessing the quality of ginseng, the first thing to do is to pay attention to the production region. About 70% of ginseng grows in Jilin province in China. The Korean white ginseng is 1 grade higher than the Chinese ginseng. Generally speaking, the organic ginseng tends to have a slightly superior flavor. You want the ginseng to have this sort of off-white, brownish color, which is associated with the non-sulfur product. If ginseng is really bright white and it has a little bit of an acrid taste of sulfur, the quality is dramatically inferior. For sliced white ginseng, generally it's better to get the whole roots yourself and have them sliced in a little ginseng slicer, or you can just steam it for a few minutes and then slice it with a knife. it's difficult to obtain unsulfured, pre-sliced white ginseng in most places. So that concludes our brief little discussion of white ginseng discernment. And come back, check out the video on red ginseng discernment. Thanks.